Hi guys. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna move my water bottle out of the way so you don't have to see it by the Acropolis. Thanks for joining me for Greek mythology. I am Robin, if you didn't join me last time or you don't know who I am. And we're gonna just be talking a little bit more about Greek mythology. We started last week on Tuesday talking about it. And yeah, we're just going to talk a little bit more. Just as a quick reminder, I think most people who have participated in our webinars know this, that we don't use the raise a hand function. So if you have a question, you can just type it into the Q&A box and I will try my best to answer it. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. So glad to see so many of you joining me. Okay, so let me share my slideshow so that we can get started. Okay, here we go. So we are, sorry, having small technical difficulty. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Greek mythology. So on Tuesday, we talked a little bit about how Greek myths sometimes attempted to explain things that the ancient Greeks observed in nature. And today we're going to talk about some of those stories that were behind the observations that they made in nature. So one important thing to understand about the ancient Greeks is that they believed in many gods. It was not just one or two, but there were many, many of them. Some gods were incredibly powerful, like Zeus, who was kind of like the top boss of all the Greek gods, or Poseidon, the god of the sea. But there were dozens or possibly hundreds of lesser gods. And lesser just means less powerful or had less of an area that they were responsible for. So here are the 12 main gods and goddesses of Olympus. You probably know a lot of them. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Ares, Hermes. Here it says Pluton, but they mean Hades. Poseidon, Hephaestus, Demeter, Hestia, Artemis, Aphrodite, Dionysus, and Apollo. So those are the 12 main ones. April, no problem being late. We are talking about the Greek gods and how they used these myths and stories to explain the things they saw around them in nature. But as you can see, this is just another diagram. There were many, many more of minor gods, not just the 12 major ones. And the ancient Greeks believed that nearly every part of life or nature had a god or goddess looking after it or affecting it. Individual rivers or trees could even be controlled by minor gods or other mythical creatures. So if you've read Percy Jackson or you're familiar with Greek mythology or Roman mythology, you know like about satyrs, which were the half men, half goats, who kind of were nature gods, or there might be dryads, which were like minor, I think, goddesses or nymphs who were responsible for certain trees. There could be gods that influenced certain flowers, rivers, parts of the ocean, maybe, you know, different things like that. Sarah, I'm glad you love Percy Jackson. I actually really love Percy Jackson as well. My kids, I have two children, one who's 13 and one who's 10, and they really love Percy Jackson. So I think I've listened to like every single one of those books. Kati, yes, gods for the winds. Aletta, Percy Jackson is just a series of books that talks about Greek mythology. Okay, so today, we're going to do a few activities to help you imagine what it was like to be an ancient Greek when they were coming up with the stories that explained their world. So here is our first activity, okay? So step one, this is what we're going to do. We're going to think of a physical location in your life where you have to spend a lot of time. So this could be the kitchen of your house, your school gym, your bedroom, the shopping mall, the soccer field, or anywhere else. Okay, so everybody start thinking of that place. Alette, thank you for telling me how to pronounce your name. So if everybody's thinking of that place, just step 2 is just like the ancient Greeks had gods and goddesses that controlled all of the important things in your lives. Think of all the important things in that location that you picked. And you're going to decide what gods or goddesses for that location would be. For example, you as an ancient Greek might look around the classroom and you would probably imagine a god of computers, a goddess of the whiteboard, a god of textbooks, and of course, a goddess of teachers. If we still lived like the ancient Greeks, your teacher might pray to the goddess of tests before giving you an exam. And every morning you might leave an apple on the altar of mighty educationos, god of learning, right? So those would be things that we would see around us that we could, if we were pretending to be an ancient Greek, that we could feel that there would be gods for. So here, so this is step 3, and there's a word in it called a pantheon. And a pantheon is a group of all the gods of a people or a culture. So all of the gods in ancient Greece would be considered the pantheon. If you're familiar with Norse mythology, or you've seen any of the Thor movies, you know that like Thor is the god of thunder, Loki is the god, I think, of mischievousness and tricks, Odin is the head boss god, so that would be part of that pantheon for those people or that culture. So what we're gonna do, so we're gonna pick our location. I saw some of you have already picked a location. Someone said Disneyland, which is like a really great inventive place. And then we're going to make up the different gods and goddesses of that location. And I will do it along with you guys. So we're gonna go, I'm gonna go back a couple so that we can just go to those steps. So the first thing is pick a physical location in your life where you spend a lot of time. So I think I spend a lot of time in the kitchen because I really love to bake and cook. And so I'm gonna think of some examples that have to do with that, okay? I see some other great ones. The San Bruno Mountain, great, Milo. Your room, also really great. Your bed, good. So like, for instance, if I was gonna do the kitchen, I would, of course, probably do the goddess of the stove, because that is an important thing. Or maybe it'd be the stove and the oven. Or I might have the god of knives. You know, that's that guy who's responsible for, you know, watching over me when I have to chop up all those vegetables that I have to make. Good, Gerald, god of the park. Wonderful. So April, great. The dining room, because you're eating breakfast, fantastic. So for those of you that have picked places, excuse me, type into the Q&A box some of the different gods that you came up with. Let's take a couple of minutes, and for each place we looked at, like, you know, Milo in the mountains, Aubrey at Disneyland, Gerald at the park, Alette, the god of messy floors, great. Milo, wonderful, the god of earth. Paige, good, the god of the living room. April, god of food. Katya, thank you for telling me how to pronounce your name. Good, Leah and Sian, I hope I said your name right, god of sleep. Good, Gerald, goddess of the bench. Good, and the thing is also that we can break it down into even smaller parts. So I had like the god of the stove, goddess of the stove and fire, or god of the knives, or god of the refrigerator. Great. Bedroom and the god of pillows. Great. Goddess of the outside. Sarah, you are the goddess of staying up late. Great. Good. In the library, the goddess of the library. Wonderful. Paige, the goddess of laziness. Yes. So these could be, every part of this area could have a group of gods, and all together, they maybe work together to control or influence that area. Wonderful. Let's see. The goddess of unmade beds, the god of smartness. Great. Good. I love these ones that you guys are coming up with. The goddess of the playground. That's right. So if we took the park, there could be the bench, there could be the playground. Could you imagine if there was the goddess of the swings? And, you know, if you wanted to swing, you first had to ask the goddess if you could. The god of the TV. Great. You guys are coming up with such great answers. God of the slide and the stairs, the goddess of the computer. That's right. So of these areas, we could make as many or as little as you wanted to, and that could be the pantheon of the gods. Great. The god of the sofa. I love that one, Paige. That's really great. The god of food, the god of water. That's right. And maybe to be able to drink the water or eat the food, you had to pray first to that. So like, let's say I have my water bottle and I might say, oh God of water, please allow this water to quench my thirst. And because I asked, and maybe because I asked nicely, they would agree. Great, the god of the carpet. Perfect. You guys you did such a great job of coming up with those examples. The god of electricity. I love that one. You know, that's why the lights are on. That's why our refrigerator makes our food cold, why we can charge our phone, why I have the internet so that I can broadcast this. The god of liquid. Perfect. I think you guys have got it. That was awesome. The god of sprinklers. I love that. The god of internet, the god of the pillows, the god of light. You guys are nailing it. Okay, perfect. The goddess of books. I love that one because I also love to read. So I definitely am a fan of the goddess of books. So next, while we now know the scientific explanation, so now we're going to get back a little bit into talking about myths as scientific explanations for things that they see and things that they saw all around them. Just like the reason that I can broadcast this is because the god of the internet is allowing me to use this power to bring this lesson to you guys. The god of the webinars. Yes, if I were in ancient Greek, I would definitely be praying to the god of the webinars before every one, that I would have a good webinar and be able to teach you guys something. So now, while we now know some of the scientific explanations for things we see in nature, it's fun to learn about what the ancient Greeks thought they were observing. And we're going to talk about some of those stories. So before I talk about some of those stories, I want to introduce you guys to a little bit of an idea that I was talking with someone about earlier, which is the Greeks liked to look at things and they liked to see the life that was in those things, and like what makes the tree grow, or what makes the leaves change color from green to yellow to orange to red to then they fall on the ground. And so they used their imagination partially to imagine the life that was living in those things that made those happen. And so that's a little bit also the stories that we are going to talk about. So the changing seasons were one of the parts of nature that the ancient Greeks wondered about. I can see some of you guys are trying to raise your hand, but just try to type it into the Q&A box and I'll try to answer the question the best I can. So someone at some point came up with a story for why the seasons would change from summer to winter. Aubrey, wonderful. You just asked the goddess of the outside if you could go outside after the class, and I hope that the answer is yes, because I don't know about where you guys are, but today in Oregon, it's a really beautiful day, and you should be spending time outside. So some of you guys might be familiar with this story, the story of why the seasons change. And the story of the seasons describes a beautiful woman named Persephone. And her mother was Demeter, and she was the goddess of the harvest. Hades, the god of the underworld, thought Persephone was so beautiful that he decided to kidnap her and bring her underground against her will, meaning she was not consulted or asked if this is what she wanted. And the reason he did that was to be his wife. So he really wanted to marry Persephone, and somehow he thought the best way to go about that was stealing her. This made her mother Demeter so sad that the earth turned cold and all the crops died. So that sounds like what? What season does that sound like? Sounds like winter, right? The other gods stepped in to try to fix the situation. So there's several different versions of this story, and different things that happened in different ways. That's one of the interesting things about Greek myths, is that there can be different versions sort of the same story, where they all kind of follow the same general pattern, like the beginning, middle, and end are maybe all the same, but the little details about what happened or how it happened might be a little different. So this is one of those stories. So yes, someone wrote winter, definitely winter. The people on Earth, the humans, the ancient Greeks, were trying to grow things and nothing would grow in the ground. And in some versions of the story, anything they tried to plant just died, and it was cold and miserable and very unhappy. So the other gods stepped in to try to fix the situation, because it obviously wasn't going to work for Demeter to be so sad and miserable that she was basically making the earth and all of the humans on the earth miserable as well. Even though that's understandable why she would feel that way. So they worked out a deal where Hades let Persephone return to the earth for part of the year. And when she returned to the earth, all the plants began to grow again. Sarah brings up a really good point. In one version, Persephone ate some pomegranate seeds, and so she had to stay in the underworld for the same amount of months as seeds that she ate. That is very true. That is a version of the story. In that version of the story, or the way those stories are sort of told, if you ate the food of the underworld, you had to stay in the underworld. And so in the version where she eats the pomegranate seeds, Persephone sort of knew that, I think. And so she didn't eat anything. They offered her things. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. And then she came upon a garden, and it was so beautiful. And I think she probably was so hungry, which I don't know about you guys, but when I get really hungry, I sometimes can't think of anything but eating, so that I'm not hungry anymore. And so she took one of the pomegranates and she ate some of the seeds before she sort of realized what she had done. And so then that was, since she had eaten the food of the underworld, technically she would have had to stay there. She couldn't have left. But they made a deal with Hades, and Zeus helped, that she had to stay for the number of seeds that she had eaten. But depending on, this is one of the interesting things about this story. So in some places, like if you live in Southern California, the winter is maybe not as long as if you live in Michigan or Minnesota, where it may be colder for longer periods of time. There might be snow. The weather might be very different. And so one of the things in ancient Greece is that depending on where you were in ancient Greece, your version of this story of Hades and Persephone might be different. So if you were in southern Greece, where it was warmer and you maybe had a shorter winter, you might say she only ate 2 or 3 of the pomegranate seeds. And so winter was only 2 or 3 months. But if you lived in northern Greece, maybe where it was more snowy or it was colder for longer periods of time, you might say she ate 6 pomegranate seeds. So for half the year, you know, she has to be down there with Hades, and half the year she's up above. Great. Yes, Aubrey, you're from California. Perfect. Someone here from London. That's amazing. From Southern California, Sarah. Yes, it starts feeling like summer in March. Right. So depending in ancient Greece, it was the same way. Depending on where you were, myths might change or shift. And to me, that kind of shows that they were useful. They were something that they used to sort of explain the life that they were living, which might be different from a person in another place in Greece. So going back to the story of Persephone and Hades, in this way, the ancient Greeks came up with an explanation for why the world would change from warm to cold and back again, and why the plants would grow and then die in a cycle. Wow, people from Ecuador, wow, California, great. Yeah, you guys are from all over. This is really awesome. So that was one of the explanations of why the seasons happened and why you couldn't grow things all the time. Also from Nigeria, how exciting. So here's another myth connected to the story of Persephone, that is that of the Narcissus flower. You may have heard of Narcissus in one Greek myth, and he's sometimes told about as a foolish young man who fell in love with his own reflection. He was so in love with the way he looked that he, you know, stared at himself in the pool, and he just stayed there. In that story, that first flower, that Narcissus flower, grows after he dies by the side of the pool where he saw his reflection, and he was so in love with it that he just spent a lot of time staring at it. So it's interesting to note here that in Greek mythology, like I've said before, there can often be multiple stories on a subject, and sometimes they contradict each other. Sometimes they go against, you know, what the other one said. So I'm going to give you an example of that right now. So my first version of the story of how the Narcissus flower came was there was this young man who was vain and really in love with himself, saw his reflection, fell so in love that he did nothing but stare at it. And then he died and the flower came up. But there's actually another version of this, of how the Narcissus flower came about, that has nothing to do with that foolish young man. In fact, the one I'm going to tell you now actually has to do with Persephone, who we just talked about. Gerald, great question. Why did he die? He died because he sort of wasted away. He was so in love with his own reflection that he didn't move and he didn't eat and he didn't drink, and he just spent all of his time staring into his own eyes and, you know, how beautiful he was. So that, you know, would be I would call that young man very foolish. And we have somebody here from India I just saw. That's so exciting. Okay, so in this version that I'm about to tell you with Persephone, in this story, it said that Zeus actually helped his brother Hades kidnap Persephone. So in the earlier version, Hades did it on his own. And in this version, he got help from his brother to do it. I want to make a note that in ancient Greek, the ancient Greeks thought even the mightiest and the best of their gods could do evil things just like humans. It wasn't that they were perfect. In fact, the more you read of Greek mythology, the more I've studied it, the more I've realized that they're actually far from perfect. And it is a way that the ancient Greeks saw themselves and their emotions, the things they experienced, the things they struggled with, the things that they were good at, that they were bad at. All of those things are reflected in the stories about the gods. So that this is just another example of that. So in this second story, Zeus wants to help Hades kidnap Persephone, but she's walking with her friends and she won't leave them. So Zeus created a beautiful purple and silver flower no one had ever seen before and made it appear near the group of young women. Great question. How do we know which version is true, though? So that's one of the great things about mythology. Maybe great or terrible, depending on how you look at it. But there is no one story that's true or not true. So we don't know, actually, because these were stories that changed through time. These were stories that people told their children, who told their children, who told their children. And like I was talking about before, depending on where you lived and how your life was, you maybe would have a slightly different version of the story than someone who lived in a different part of your country. But that's a great question. And yes, Sarah, good. This is the Narcissus flower. So something that's really interesting about this flower, which I discovered when just recently, was that the Narcissus flower is very similar to a daffodil. So we have a lot of daffodils here at the Delphian School and where I live, but they're white with a little yellow. The circle part in the middle is yellow. They come up every spring. They grow a lot here, and they grow very easily. This is actually a picture of a daffodil, which is under like black light. So if you guys know what black light is, it's a certain type of light bulb where it just shows a certain, or UV light where it shows a different color and you can look at it in a different way. And these are daffodils under that type of light. And what color are they? They are beautiful purple and silver, which I think is like amazing because UV light and those things didn't exist when the Greeks were telling this story. So this is what we believe the Narcissus looks like. So Persephone thought it was so beautiful, which I don't blame her because I think this is a stunning, beautiful photo myself, that she left her friends to go pick this flower. It was just so gorgeous, she just had to have it. Suddenly, Hades leapt out of a hole in the earth and he carried Persephone back to the underworld. So it seems that the Greeks believed this flower was so beautiful that they thought that the mightiest of the gods must have created it personally. Does the flower come in other countries too? I think so. I'm sure that it does. It probably depends, like most things grow well or not well, depending on how warm it is, how much sunshine there is. But yes, this flower is a real flower. It's a flower that you can buy and that you can plant. But this was the way that the Greeks believed this flower came about. I think these myths are true in that people believed them. Whether they like believed them, meaning like they really 100% thought that this is where the flower came from, or that it was an interesting story about how the flower was created is hard to know. And one of the ways I think people kept track of these stories is at some point they started writing them down. And they started documenting them. Many times they would be stories told from person to person, but as language and written language developed, they were able to record them so that they could have them to pass on to people. And I think it's incredible that thousands of years later, we still read these same stories. Aubrey, very good point. Why didn't he just ask her to be his wife? I'm not quite sure. If we were writing a modern myth about this, I'm sure that that's what we would do. It may be that it creates a more interesting story or a more exciting story, but I don't really know for sure. Okay, good. So that's an example of two different mythology stories that may contradict or go against each other, and explain a natural phenomena, something that they saw. Regina, welcome from Mexico. Wonderful. Okay, so here is a lesser well-known story of Helios and Clytie. So Clytie was the daughter of Oceanus, who was one of the Titans, who were the main big, huge, strong gods that came before the Olympic gods like Zeus, Hera, Hades. And so the Titans were these powerful beings that came before Greek gods, like I just said. So she had fallen in love with the Titan Helios, who drew the sun across the sky in his chariot. So that was the way that the ancient Greeks explained why the sun started in one place, traveled through the sky, and ended in another. A-D-Thee, thank you. Hopefully I said that right, and hopefully I will remember that. Sometimes I'm not so great with the names and how to pronounce them, so I apologize ahead of time. So Clytie loved to watch Helios race across the sky, and Helios eventually fell in love with her as well. As it happens in many Greek myths, many times in these stories, Helios got tired of Clytie and he left her. And the young woman was so sad that she died from her grief. Great question. Do people have actual scientific facts against these myths? I do not know. Though I do know for some of the stories, there is a very famous story about Odysseus trying to get home after a war. I talked about the book, The Odyssey, last time. There are sometimes stories or scientific facts that maybe explain why certain things happened. Like for instance, why it took them so long to get home, or different parts in the stories. But I'm not totally sure if I don't think, though I could be wrong, that there is hard science to back up every single one of them. So instead of dying as mortals do, so this is back to Clytie, the woman who was in love with the Titan who drew the sun across the sky, and he loved her back until he didn't, and then he left her behind, and she was so sad she died. So instead of dying as a normal mortal would do, however, in the place where her body had been, grew the first sunflower. Now, sunflowers are known for turning their faces, which is the actual flower, to follow the sun as it passes across the sky. That is a scientific fact, that the sunflower will actually grow in such a way that it will face towards the sun. And I've actually even heard, though I don't know this is true, this is just something that I've heard if it can't see the sun, it will face another sunflower, which is really interesting to me. Don't know if it's true or not, just something that that I've heard. And maybe it's because it looks like the sun. I'm not totally sure. Do these gods really have magical powers? Yes, the ancient Greeks believed in many ways that they did have magical powers. Zeus has a lightning bolt. Poseidon could control the waves and the sea. Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom, could, it's kind of hard to explain, but I'll try to do my best, could do something that would disguise what you were seeing or help you see something more clearly. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this and that you think this is so fun and the stories are engaging. And yes, sunflowers are sun followers. So to the ancient Greeks, when they saw these sunflowers turning their faces towards the sun, this explanation made sense to see why, you know, to explain why that would happen and why they would watch the sun. I don't think there's an actual way to find the actual truth behind these myths. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are scholars or studiers of Greek myths who spend a lot of time doing that. But it's a little bit more about understanding the stories and kind of understanding that culture, to me, at least. So now, again, touching on that same thing, the big difference between modern science and the ancient myths is that the ancient Greeks could come up with stories for how their world worked, but they had no way to know if they were right or not. But I think the ancient Greeks probably didn't really mind, though, if the story made enough sense or was especially fun or tragic, very, very sad, like the girl dying and becoming a sunflower because the god broke, you know, the Titan broke her heart. They probably would just accept it and move on. They'd be like, oh, that's kind of a cool story. Okay, that makes sense. And then it was just something that they, you know, something that made sense to them. So now we're going to do another activity. You guys did such a great job at the first one. So the second one is we're going to have some fun with these idea of these myths by coming up with some myths of our own. So we're going to pretend again that we're ancient Greeks. So everybody be pretending that you're an ancient Greek. And we're going to pick something that we can observe in the natural world, something that we can see in the natural world and try to come up with an explanation for it. So I have some of these different questions. So our first step is we're going to pick a question about nature from this list, or we can think of our own. I tried to pick these questions because they're ones that don't necessarily, or not that I know of, have a myth attached to them already. So here's some questions. Pick a question from this list or make up your own if you really want to. So why do things fall when you drop them? What is the moon and why does it orbit the earth? Why do some animals eat meat and others eat only plants? Why does it rain? Where do ocean waves come from? Why do human babies take so long to learn to walk? And why are dogs such good friends with people? So those are some questions about things we may see around us, some natural things that we may not know. I mean, maybe we know, like we all know why things fall when we drop them. It's the law of gravity. But as an ancient Greek, we could come up with our own story about why that happens. Okay, so did everybody think of a question they want to answer or pick one from the list? Oops, sorry guys. I scrolled way too far ahead. Okay. Good. So now we're going to think like an ancient Greek. So what god or goddess could be in control of this part of nature? Now you can make up your own god or goddess, by the way. What could have happened in the past that made this part of nature act the way that it does? Try to think of a story that answers the question you asked in step 1. Now, step 3, now you're going to use the Q&A box to type up the answer to your question. So type a few sentences answering the question that you picked, and I'll share your myth with the class. Okay, good. So I think I'm gonna go back so that we can see the questions. Great, here's one. Alette, why does it rain? There is a goddess of friendship, and when she sees people arguing, she becomes so sad that she weeps and her tears become rain. Wow, that's a really great one. Good, nice. Does anybody else have one? I was thinking of this one. You know, why do things fall when you drop them? Yes, gravity is the physics behind why that happens. But what if we said it was like Mother Earth, Gaia, or Gia, depending on how you say her name? You know, everything on Earth belongs to her. The rocks, the trees, everything. And so then and she's very jealous, maybe. She doesn't like people taking or holding on to these things that are hers. And so when you drop things, they return to their mother. They return to Mother Earth. So if you take a rock and you drop it, it returns to her. Good, Aubrey. When it rains, the gods and goddesses are sad. Perfect. Who else has another one? Question E. Oh, I love this one. The ocean waves exist because the goddess of the ocean fell in love with a human she always saw walking in the beach and tried to reach him on the shore with the waves. Oh, Leah and Sia, and I hope I say your name right. That's such a great one. Good. Does anybody else have any other ones that they would like to share or that they've come up with? Gerard, I think the reason the ocean waves are caused by the gods of the moon. Luna, when she is playing tug of war with the earth. Oh, that's so great. And that's really great because the moon and the cycle of the moon does affect the waves and things like that. Paige, my story is the goddess of the earth protects the earth until there was an asteroid that would smash the earth to millions of pieces. So she got a shield to protect the earth. So that is why things fall. That's really great. You guys are so inventive. Milo, why is there a moon? There was a goddess of the planets and at night, and they wanted planet Earth to have light at night. Perfect. Wonderful. Good. Does anybody else have any other myths that they would like to share that would explain something that we see around them? Katya, I think I said your name wrong again. I'm so sorry. The god of the moon orbits the earth. One day, Athena, the god, was so impressed that she went flying up to the moon. And when she got to the moon, the god of the moon was not happy to see her. But she knew she was really impressed, so he let her have her own carriage to travel there every month. When the moon changed shapes, the carriage changed the shape of the shadow. Great. Long ago, all animals ate plants, but then they ate all of the plants of the earth and there were no more. Then they started eating each other. When the plants finally grew back, some animals went back to eating only plants, but some kept eating other animals. Oh, Sarah, that's a great one. Adira, I hope I said your name right too. Some people were playing in Athena's temple and she was so angry she turned them into dogs. I like that explanation. There was a goddess of loyalty who was always mistreated by the other gods, so she turned into a dog and made good friends with a human. She was very loyal to the human, and their friendship was extraordinary. And when she went back, the other gods realized how important loyalty is. That is so great. That is one that checks sort of two boxes, which is it not only explains a natural thing, but it also explains an important lesson like loyalty. The reason dogs are friendly is because the goddess of dogs was friends with everyone. So that's why dogs are friends with humans. Good, Gerard. April, why are dogs so good friends with people? Because some dogs love the way people play with them, and they just have to give them so much love. And then after that, the dogs fell in love with people. Wonderful. Dogs protect people. Great. Good. So you guys did such a great job of that. Okay, let's see. What do I have? Oh, okay, good. Well, that is the end of my slideshow, but I was going to talk about one other thing very quickly, which I don't have any slides for, so you'll have to excuse me. I was just going to talk about ancient Greeks and the idea of heroes and the stories that have to do with heroes. So if you are familiar with Greek mythology and you are familiar with some of the different stories in Greek mythology, you maybe are familiar with different heroes. Most of the times they are children of the gods called demigods, and they do some pretty incredible things. Some examples that you may know, though it's okay if you don't, is Hercules is a very famous Greek hero. Odysseus is a very famous Greek hero. Theseus, who killed the Minotaur, is a very famous Greek hero. And there's some things. Milo, yes, he is the guy with the Cyclops. Odysseus is. Oh, look, we have another myth, which I want to read you guys because it's really great. Goddess of life saw that kids grow so fast and parents usually miss them a lot when they move out. So she wanted toddlers to take their time to learn how to walk so parents could have great memories with their kids and spend precious time with them. Oh, I love that so much. So back to the heroes, a lot of these Greek heroes had very similar characteristics or things, abilities that they had that they shared with each other. Many of them were born of the gods in some way. So they were part god, part human. Another thing that they usually, some different characteristics is a lot of them, when you start reading them, are very handsome. For some reason, if you were a hero, you had to be handsome in ancient Greece. They are smart. They are resourceful, which means that they can be in a situation and kind of think on their feet and know how to solve it. So I was going to tell a story about one of these Greek heroes, which some of you may already know. Milo already said a little bit about it, the guy with the Cyclops. The man I was going to talk about his name was Odysseus. And Odysseus was a Gerard. Thank you, Gerard. Hopefully I said your name right. He was a king in ancient Greece, and he ruled a kingdom called Ithaca. And he went to go fight in a war, the Trojan War. And once the Trojan War was over, it actually took him 20 years to get back home. And he ran into some trouble with the gods, but he also did some things which caused that to happen. But there's one story about him, which is, if you could think about, if you were trapped in a room with your worst enemy or an enemy that you had to defeat, how might you defeat that enemy? Somebody who's maybe bigger and stronger and, is going to try to stop you from what you want to do. So in this story about Odysseus, he and his men, when they were sailing back from war, they came to the island of the Cyclops, which hopefully all of you are familiar with. It was a monster in ancient Greece, the son of Poseidon, and they had one eye. And they were usually big and hairy and very, very strong, and they ate people, and they were monsters. So they were like the villains of the ancient Greek myth. And they came to this island, and they went into a cave, and they saw lots of food and riches and sheep skins and all these things. But it turned out that the cave belonged to this Cyclops, whose name was Polyphemus, was the name of this Cyclops. And so so the Cyclops Polyphemus, he came back, and he demanded to know who these strangers were in his cave. And Odysseus said, "We are just some Greeks who are trying to get back home. And please give us hospitality, or please let us stay in your cave." And Polyphemus was like, "No." And what he did though was he rolled this huge big boulder in front of the door, and it was very, very heavy. And only he, with his superhuman strength, could move it. And then he ate 2 of Odysseus's men. So Odysseus, as the hero of the story, he's a man who's smart, intelligent. He thinks very well on his feet, which means he can come up with solutions like that. He thinks he has to come up with a plan. So he comes up with this plan, and over the next day or a couple days, the Cyclops eats some more of his men, and he knows he has to get out of there. And he wants to kill the Cyclops right away. He gets so angry that he just wants to kill him. But he realizes if he kills him, then he'll be stuck in that cave with the rest of his men, and nobody will know they're there. They won't be able to move the boulder, and they'll just be trapped. So the smart man that he is, he comes up with another plan. And he comes up with a plan that he is going to blind the Cyclops so that they can escape. And what he does is he has his men start to make this big stake or spear, take this big log and sharpen the end of it. He gives the Cyclops some wine so that he gets a little sleepy and goes to sleep. And then I'm going to go back because I forgot a little bit of the story. I'm so sorry about that. There's an important part of the story that I forgot, which is when the Cyclops asked Odysseus what his name was, he said his name was No Man, like no man. But he said it as one word, like no man, because he thought, I don't want to tell this guy who I really am. So later, when they blinded the Cyclops by putting that spear in the Cyclops' eye, the Cyclops called no man is hurting me. No man is blinding me. But his brothers who heard him thought he was saying no man, not a man was blinding me. And they didn't come to see what was happening. So it was smart of Odysseus to give that fake name. So anyway, he blinded him through other ways of strapping himself to the sheep and different things like that. He was able to escape, and then he was able to get away. And so everything should be good, right? Everything should be fine. But Odysseus had a problem, which was that he was too proud and too full of himself. And so as he went away with the Cyclops, he could not resist. He couldn't stop himself from telling the Cyclops, what his name really was. And he said, I tricked you. My name isn't No Man. My name is Odysseus. And the Cyclops, threw a rock and almost killed them. And he just couldn't stop it. And he's like, you're not better than me. I'm better than you. And my name is Odysseus. And and he basically couldn't hold in his own pride. And that actually got Odysseus in trouble. And it was part of the reason that it took him so long to be able to come home. So that's just a story about Greek heroes, a little bit more of the lesson that it can teach you. Sarah says Tyson was a good Cyclops, which is actually really true. If you've read Percy Jackson, then Tyson is a good Cyclops. So thank you guys so much for joining me for my webinar. I really appreciate you coming to listen to my stories and all the things that you told me. I just wanted to also tell you guys more. We also have some books which we're selling on the Heron Books website if you wanted to know more about Earth and geography, which is really kind of the science behind some of the Greek myths that they're talking about. I'm glad you guys really had a great time, and I hope to see you next time. Okay, bye.